When I was around 13 years old, my cousin Emma, who was a year younger, and our friend John, who lived close to us, decided to go on an adventure in the Allegheny National Forest. We all loved exploring the woods, spending hours hiking and discovering new areas. This story describes one of our most memorable encounters that took place near the Allegheny National Forest. One Saturday, Emma, John, and I gathered at my house in the morning, prepared our backpacks with snacks and water bottles, and set off for our day trip into the Allegheny National Forest. The sun was shining, and there was a gentle breeze. We took one of our favorite trails, which had always provided ample opportunities for exploring and playing in the woods. As we ventured deeper into the forest, we found a small creek that we had not noticed on any of our previous hikes. We decided to follow it, thinking it might lead us to something interesting or fun. The creek meandered through the trees, growing deeper and wider the farther we went. As we walked along the bank, John spotted something unusual near the water. It was a fox, drinking from the creek. We had seen foxes before, but this one was different. Its eyes were larger than a typical fox, and it stared directly at us. Most foxes would have run away from humans, but this one did not seem frightened or interested in leaving its spot. Instead, it calmly watched us as we passed by. Ignoring the odd behavior, we continued to follow the creek. Soon the trees started to thin out, and we entered an open field filled with tall grass. In the distance, we could see a structure that looked like an old barn. Excited by this discovery, we decided to investigate. As we approached the barn, we felt like we were being watched. The sensation was hard to explain, but we couldn't shake it off. Despite the feeling, we pushed on, curious about the building ahead. The barn seemed old and abandoned, with its wooden doors hanging off their hinges. Emma took the lead, peeking inside to see if there was anything interesting. But it seemed rather standard, empty except for some old tools and hay on the ground. As we were about to leave, we heard footsteps outside. Our hearts raced. With Emma in front, we cautiously stepped out of the barn to see who was there. To our surprise, we saw the same fox we had come across earlier by the creek. It was standing a few feet away from us, staring at us with its large eyes. Before we could react, the fox began to walk away, stopping a short distance down and looking back at us, as if it wanted us to follow it. Intrigued, we decided to follow the fox, wondering what it was trying to show us. The fox led us to the edge of the woods, near a small clearing. There we discovered something completely unexpected. In the middle of the clearing stood a deer, but it was unlike any deer we had ever seen before. Its head appeared to be too large for its body, and it was missing some patches of its fur. The deer stared at us with the same penetrating gaze as the fox. Then, it let out a sound that seemed to echo around the clearing. The sound was haunting, making us feel on edge. Emma finally spoke, saying, "Maybe we should head back now." John and I agreed, and we turned to leave the strange scene, with the unnerving feeling that we had witnessed something unnatural and inexplicable. As we made our way back through the forest, we stayed quiet, processing the bewildering events that had taken place. Our hike back felt more somber and less carefree compared to when we had started our adventure earlier in the day. Once we returned to my house, we discussed what had happened, trying to make sense of our peculiar encounter. Eventually, we decided that, while what we saw might remain unexplained, we were lucky to have experienced something so mysterious right in our backyard. I'm sorry if my story wasn't spooky, but it was very weird for all of us. I remember my first few days as a park ranger trainee at the Allegheny National Forest. It was a completely new experience for me. On my first day, I was told that I would be working on search and rescue missions. The job seemed exciting and adventurous. It was my dream job, and I was eager to start. One day, I was assigned to search for a lost hiker in the forest. I was with my trainer, and we had a team of well-trained dogs with us. As we began our search, we came across various terrain obstacles such as rocky hills, thick bushes, and muddy patches of land. Despite this, the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we were confident that we would find the lost hiker. After a while, we came across an area where the hiker was last seen. We found clear signs that the lost hiker was in the area, and the dog's scent trail led us towards a berry patch. We found the lost hiker, a 4-year-old boy who wasn't even aware that he had wandered so far. One of the vets brought him back to his mother, which was a relief for me because I'm not good with kids. As we were headed back to base, my trainer decided to take me on a detour to show me a hot spot where they often find missing people. It was a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people tended to move downhill towards it. It was a few miles away, and we got there in about an hour or so. As we walked around the area, my trainer pointed out places where she had found people in the past. It was then that I saw something strange in the distance. I saw what appeared to be a staircase. It was a 10-step staircase with beige carpet in the middle of the forest. It looked completely out of place, and my brain was working overtime trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I asked my trainer what it was doing there, but she didn't say anything. She just hung back and let me wander over and check it out. I got within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like I was standing in the middle of a horror movie. It was like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely, and the stairs were the only thing visible. The staircase was in good condition, but it was clear that it had been there for a while. My trainer came and stood next to me, and she just stood there casually, looking at it as if it was the least interesting thing in the world. I asked her again what the hell it was doing there, but she just chuckled and said, "Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them." I couldn't understand what she meant by that, but I didn't dare ask any further. We ended up moving on, and the subject didn't come up again for the rest of my training. As I continued to work as a park ranger, I saw more and more of these strange staircases. They were always in good condition, but they were always out of place. Sometimes they were relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Other times, they were 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only found them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They were all different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest staircase I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. "It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal. But don't go close to them or up them." Despite hearing this from several people, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease every time I came across one of these strange staircases. I couldn't understand why they were there or how they got there. I began to wonder if they were some kind of supernatural occurrence, but I didn't want to entertain that thought too much. As time went on, I saw more and more of these staircases. They were always in different locations throughout the forest, and I couldn't find any pattern or reason behind their placement. I tried to do some research on them, but I couldn't find anything. It was like they didn't exist outside of the forest. One day, while on a routine patrol, I stumbled upon a group of hikers who had also seen one of the staircases. They were just as confused and freaked out as I was. We began to talk about our experiences, and I realized that I wasn't the only one who had seen these strange staircases. I still didn't have any answers, but it was comforting to know that I wasn't alone in my confusion. Over time, I started to accept that these staircases were just a part of the forest. They were strange and inexplicable, but they didn't seem to pose any threat. To this day, I still come across these staircases from time to time. Each time I see one, I still feel a sense of unease, but I know that they are just a strange part of the forest that I may never fully understand. I was born in a small town in Pennsylvania, not far from the Allegheny National Forest, in 1980. I have an older sister, who we'll call Sarah. In 1985, my family decided to take a camping trip to the Allegheny National Forest. I was 5 years old at the time, and my sister was 8. We were both excited about the adventure, as we had never been camping before. We arrived at the campsite on a sunny afternoon and quickly set up our tent. The forest was beautiful, with tall trees and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. My sister and I spent the day exploring the area, collecting sticks and rocks and playing games. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and listening to our parents tell stories. The sky was clear and filled with stars, and the sounds of the forest were soothing. Eventually, we crawled into our tent and fell asleep. The next morning, Sarah and I decided to go for a walk in the woods while our parents prepared breakfast. We followed a narrow trail, enjoying the sights and sounds of the forest. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light on the forest floor. We walked for about half an hour before deciding to head back to the campsite. As we turned around, we noticed something strange in the sky. It was a bright white light, similar in size and brightness to the stars we had seen the night before. At first we thought it was just a plane or a satellite, but then it started to move in an unusual way. The light zigzagged across the sky, changing directions abruptly and moving much faster than any aircraft we had ever seen. We stared at the light, trying to figure out what it could be. Suddenly, it stopped moving and hovered in place for a few seconds before disappearing completely. We were both stunned and couldn't believe what we had just witnessed. We hurried back to the campsite to tell our parents about the strange light in the sky. When we arrived, our parents were already packing up the campsite, as they had planned to leave that day. We excitedly told them about the mysterious light we had seen, but they dismissed it as our imaginations running wild. They said it was probably just a plane or a satellite, and we shouldn't worry about it. Despite their reassurances, Sarah and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had seen something extraordinary. We spent the rest of the day talking about the light and speculating about what it could have been. As night approached, we were both eager to see if the light would reappear. That evening, we sat outside our tent, staring at the sky and waiting for the mysterious light to return. Hours passed, and we were about to give up when we suddenly heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. We froze, unsure of what could be making the noise. Our parents had warned us about the wildlife in the forest, so we were cautious not to make any sudden movements. The rustling grew louder, and we could hear heavy footsteps approaching our campsite. Our hearts raced as we tried to stay as still and quiet as possible. Then, a large dark figure emerged from the bushes and stood at the edge of our campsite. It was tall and thin, with long limbs and a strange, elongated head. Its eyes were large and black, and it seemed to be studying us intently. Sarah and I exchanged terrified glances, unsure of what to do. The creature didn't seem to be aggressive, but we were still frightened by its appearance. We slowly backed away, trying to put some distance between us and the strange being. As we moved, the creature suddenly turned and disappeared back into the forest, leaving us both shaken and bewildered. We rushed back to our parents, who were inside the tent, and told them about the encounter. They were skeptical, but they could see how scared we were, and decided to pack up and leave the campsite immediately. To this day, Sarah and I still talk about our experience in the Allegheny National Forest. We don't know if the strange light in the sky and the mysterious creature were connected, but we're certain that we witnessed something extraordinary. Our parents may not believe us, but we know what we saw, and it's an experience we'll never forget. I've been a search and rescue (SAR) volunteer for years, and there's one case that has always stuck with me. It happened in the Allegheny National Forest, where my team and I were called in to search for a missing child. The child was a 6-year-old boy who had been hiking with his family when he wandered off the trail. His parents had turned their backs for only a moment, but that was enough time for him to disappear. We spent days searching the area, combing through the dense forest and calling out his name, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Then, one evening, one of our search dogs caught a scent and led us to a nearby river. There, we found the boy's shoe floating in the water. We immediately began searching the riverbanks and soon came across his body, which had been washed ashore. It was a devastating discovery, and we knew that the family would be shattered by the news. The cause of his death was unknown, and it was a mystery as to how he ended up in the river. It was a tragic and heart-wrenching case, one that I will never forget. It serves as a reminder of the dangers of the wilderness and the importance of being vigilant at all times, especially when hiking with young children. The boy's disappearance was reported on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and the Allegheny National Forest was bustling with hikers and campers. Our team was immediately called in to help with the search, and we arrived on the scene within an hour. We organized our search efforts and began combing through the heavily wooded area. We scoured the trails, creeks, and hills for any sign of the missing child. The search continued for days, and as each day passed, our hopes began to diminish. The weather was also not in our favor. It was the end of September, and the forest was already experiencing colder temperatures. The days were getting shorter, and the nights were getting longer. We knew that time was running out, and we had to find the boy as soon as possible. On the 4th day of the search, we received a lead from a camper who had heard strange noises coming from a nearby river. We quickly mobilized our team and search dogs and headed towards the river. As we arrived, we could hear the sounds of rushing water and the barking of our search dogs. We split up into teams and began searching the riverbanks. It was a treacherous area with rocky cliffs and slippery stones, but we were determined to find the boy. As we searched, we came across a shoe that was floating in the river. We knew immediately that it belonged to the missing child. Our search intensified, and we finally found the boy's body washed ashore. He was lying face down, and it was clear that he had drowned. The sight was a heart-wrenching one, and we knew that the family would be devastated by the news. The autopsy report revealed that the boy had died from drowning and hypothermia. We learned that he had wandered off the trail and had fallen into the river, where he had been swept away by the current. The water was cold, and he had no chance of survival. It was a tragic ending to a search that had consumed us for days. The boy's family was heartbroken, and the community was in mourning. But we knew that we had done everything we could to find him. We had searched tirelessly, and we had found him. Though it was not the outcome we had hoped for, we had given the family closure and helped them to move on. In 1995, I lived in a small town just outside the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. Growing up, my brother Tom and I were inseparable, with our favorite activity being exploring the vast forest. We would usually spend time after school and on weekends wandering through the woods, collecting rocks, and searching for anything out of the ordinary. One Saturday in October, Tom and I decided to venture further into the forest than we ever had before. We planned to spend the entire day hiking deeper into the woods, following the trail our father had shown us just a few weeks prior. We packed our lunches, grabbed our backpacks, and set out early in the morning on our anticipated adventure. The day was perfect for hiking, with bright blue skies and a crisp autumn breeze. We spent hours trekking through the forest, marveling at the beauty of the changing leaves and spotting an occasional deer or two. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, we realized we'd gone too far and needed to start heading back home. We turned around and started to retrace our steps when we heard a strange noise neither of us could identify. It sounded like a low growl, followed by a rustling in the bushes nearby. Tom and I exchanged worried glances and picked up our pace, trying not to let our imaginations run wild. The peculiar sounds continued as we walked, and we noticed an uneasy feeling growing within us. It felt like we were being watched. As we kept moving forward, we managed to convince ourselves that it was probably just a wild animal, like a raccoon or a fox. Nevertheless, we couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. Hoping to speed up our return home, we decided to take a shortcut through an area of the woods we weren't familiar with. As we walked along the unfamiliar path, the noises seemed to grow louder, and the strange feeling of being followed persisted. Suddenly, we came to an old uprooted tree near a small creek. We paused for a moment to catch our breath, deciding to put some distance between us and whatever was behind us. As we crossed the creek, we noticed that the rustling sound had stopped. We felt a temporary sense of relief, believing that whatever had been following us was finally gone. However, that feeling of relief didn't last long. As we continued along the unfamiliar path, we heard the growling sound again, this time much closer. We were starting to get lost. Tom and I began to panic. We found ourselves deep in the forest with an unknown creature lurking nearby. We needed to get back to familiar territory as soon as possible. For what felt like hours, we stumbled through the underbrush while continuously hearing the growling noise. The sun was now setting, and the darkness made it difficult for us to keep track of our surroundings. We decided to break the silence, trying to soothe our nerves by talking about how crazy this story would be when we told our friends at school. Finally, as the last light of day began to fade, we saw a familiar landmark, an old service road that cut through the woods, leading back to our town. As we reached it, the eerie sounds and feeling of being watched suddenly ceased. We heaved a sigh of relief, knowing we were almost home. As we walked the remaining distance, we discussed what might have been following us. We agreed that it had to be a large animal, but what kind remained a mystery. Though we had spent countless hours in those woods, we had never encountered anything like that before. When we finally arrived home, our parents had grown worried and scolded us for being out so late. We decided not to tell them about our unsettling experience, not wanting any restrictions on our future adventures. This one freaked us out for a long time to come. Growing up near the Allegheny National Forest, I frequently encountered deer on our property. Deer hunting was a popular activity in our town, and we often shared stories about our experiences in the woods. I remember hearing tales about not deer sightings, a strange creature that resembled deer, but had odd movements and unnerving behavior. Despite my skepticism, I couldn't shake off the curiosity and odd sense of dread that accompanied these stories. One summer evening, I decided to venture on a solo camping trip in the Allegheny National Forest. My plan was straightforward: hike into the forest, set up camp, and enjoy a peaceful night with only the sounds of nature to keep me company. Little did I know, that's not how things would turn out. After finding the perfect camping spot, a small clearing surrounded by dense trees, I set up my tent and started a fire. The eerie beauty of the forest at twilight gave me a sense of comfort and tranquility. As the night deepened, the sounds of nocturnal creatures filled the air. I drifted off to sleep, feeling content and secure. I was awoken suddenly by the sound of rustling leaves and snapping twigs drawing closer to my camp. Assuming it was a curious deer, I carefully unzipped my tent and peeked outside, expecting to see a familiar sight. Instead, my heart raced as I saw something I couldn't quite comprehend. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was a creature that seemed to resemble a deer, but its appearance was off. Its neck was awkwardly elongated, and it stood in a bizarre position that made it look as though its neck was fused with its front legs. Frozen in place, I stared at it, wondering if the not deer stories I'd brushed off could actually be true. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, filling me with a deep sense of unease, before turning and disappearing back into the woods with unnatural movements. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen, but knew there was no way I could spend another night camping, at least not alone. Not waiting for morning, I hastily packed up my gear and exited the forest. Once home, I shared my experience with family and friends, half expecting them to laugh it off. To my surprise, many believed my story and shared their own unsettling encounters in the Allegheny National Forest. The reality of it all was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake off the lingering feeling of dread that seemed to follow me everywhere. From that day on, I took the stories of the not deer far more seriously. I still visit the forest regularly, but now with a heightened sense of caution and awareness, always wondering if I'll come across that strange creature again. The Allegheny National Forest is undoubtedly a beautiful place, but it also conceals mysteries and secrets that make it all the more intriguing and, at times, terrifying. I remember the time my friend and I went camping in the Allegheny National Forest. It was a beautiful spot, surrounded by tall trees and a small creek that flowed nearby. We set up our tents and settled in for the night, looking forward to a relaxing weekend in nature. As the sun began to set, we started to hear strange noises coming from the woods. At first, we thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, or some small animals scurrying about. But then we heard something much larger moving around. We couldn't see anything, but the rustling was getting closer and closer. We decided to build up the fire to try and keep whatever was out there away. We gathered some extra logs and threw them on, hoping the light and heat would deter any predators. But the noises continued, and we started to feel uneasy. We knew we were deep in the woods, far from any other people, and we couldn't afford to take any chances. Just then, we heard a low growling sound coming from the darkness. We froze, not sure what to do next. Then we saw a pair of glowing eyes staring at us from the tree line. We knew we were in trouble. As we watched, more eyes appeared, until there were at least a dozen glowing orbs staring at us. We could hear the animals moving closer, and we knew we had to do something fast. We remembered reading that loud noises can sometimes scare off predators, so we started yelling and banging pots together. It seemed to work, as the animals stopped advancing and just watched us from a distance. We sat there for what felt like hours, unsure of what to do next. The creatures were still out there, watching us. We could feel their eyes on us, even though we couldn't see them clearly in the darkness. We were too scared to move or make any more noise, so we just huddled around the fire, waiting for morning to come. As the night wore on, we started to feel more and more anxious. The noises from the woods continued, and we could sense that the animals were getting restless. We tried to stay calm, but it was getting harder and harder to do so. Then, just as we were starting to think we were safe, we heard something much larger approaching. It was a huge creature, with long limbs and shaggy fur. It walked upright, like a man, but it wasn't a human. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. The creature stopped just short of the firelight and looked at us, its eyes glowing in the darkness. We didn't know what to do. We were too scared to move or make any more noise. The creature just stood there, watching us, for what felt like an eternity. Finally it turned and disappeared back into the woods. We were left there, shaking and terrified, until morning finally came. We packed up our camp and left as soon as we could, not wanting to risk another encounter with that mysterious creature. Looking back on that night, I still get chills. I have no idea what we saw, or what those creatures were. But I know one thing for sure. I never want to go camping in the Allegheny National Forest again. I'm a member of a search and rescue team based in the Allegheny National Forest, and our job is to help people who are lost or in trouble. We get all kinds of calls, but one of the most common is for missing people. It's always a race against time because the longer someone is out there, the harder it is to find them. One time we got a call about an elderly man who had gone hiking alone and hadn't come back. His wife was worried that he might have had a seizure and gotten lost. We knew we had to act fast, so we geared up and headed out to find him. We're a close-knit team, and we work like a well-oiled machine. We know these woods like the backs of our hands, and we have some of the best trackers and dogs around. As we made our way along the trail, we kept our eyes peeled for any sign of the missing man. Before long, one of our veterans found signs that the man had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a fan to make sure we were covering as much ground as possible. We were hopeful that we would find him soon, but the terrain was rough, and time was running out. Suddenly, a call came over the radio telling us to all head back to the vet's location. We knew that this usually meant that the missing person was injured, and we needed a full team to help get them out safely. We rushed back, eager to help in any way we could. When we arrived, we saw something strange. There was a walking stick hanging from a branch about 30 feet off the ground. We couldn't believe it. There was no way the man could have thrown it up there, and we didn't see any other signs of him in the area. We called up into the tree, but there was no response. We searched the surrounding area, but we never found the missing man. We even brought our dogs out, but they lost his scent long before the tree. It was like he had vanished into thin air. We were left scratching our heads, wondering how the walking stick had gotten up there. It was a puzzling and unsettling sight. We couldn't help but speculate if something sinister had happened to the man. The search went on for days, and we scoured every inch of the area. We even called in other search teams to help us cover more ground. But despite our best efforts, we never found the missing man. His wife called us every day for months, hoping for news of her husband, but we had nothing to tell her. It was a tough case for all of us, and we still talk about it from time to time, wondering what could have happened to him. It was a cool autumn day when I decided to take a hike in the Allegheny National Forest. The leaves had started to change, and the air was crisp and fresh. I had been on the trail for a few hours, enjoying the peacefulness of the woods. As I was walking, I started to feel uneasy. It was a feeling that I couldn't shake off. I tried to ignore it, and continued on my way. But then I started hearing strange noises. It sounded like crunching leaves and snapping twigs. I turned around, but nothing was there. I picked up my pace, hoping to get to the end of the trail soon. As I turned a corner, I saw a deer standing in the distance. It was a massive creature, with antlers that looked almost like moose antlers. I watched it for a while, admiring its beauty. But then, I noticed something strange. It was staring right at me. I tried to ignore it and kept walking, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I turned around again and saw the deer following me. It was moving in a strange way, almost like a rocking horse. I started to feel scared and picked up my pace, but the deer kept following me, its bipedal stride getting closer and closer. I turned around again, and this time I saw its face. It was all wrong. Its eyes were front-facing and its snout was too short. Its mouth was rounded, unlike a deer's. I knew then that it was not a deer. It was something else entirely. I turned around to run, but the creature was now standing on its hind legs, towering over me at least 8 feet tall. I ran as fast as I could, hearing its footsteps getting closer and closer. I finally made it back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I later talked to a local guide who told me that there were things in the forest that were not of this world. He said that what I saw was a forest spirit and I had disturbed it. From that day on, I never went hiking alone and always carried protection with me. After that terrifying experience, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had encountered. I did some research and found out that the Allegheny National Forest is known for its strange sightings and unexplained phenomena. I decided to talk to some of the locals and see if they had ever experienced anything similar. Some were hesitant to talk about it, but others were more than happy to share their stories. One person told me about a creature that they saw near the river. It was described as a giant bipedal deer with antlers the size of tree branches. Another person told me about a group of hikers who went missing and were never found. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen and heard. I started to wonder if there was something else out there in the forest, something that we couldn't explain or understand. I decided to go back to the forest, but this time, I was more prepared. I brought a flashlight, a map, and a hunting knife. As I walked through the woods, I felt a sense of unease. But this time, I was ready for whatever might come my way. As I walked deeper into the forest, I heard strange noises. It sounded like whispers and laughter, but there was no one around. I saw shadows moving in the trees, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there. I started to feel like I was being watched again. I turned around, and there it was. The creature that I had seen before. Its eyes were staring right at me, and I knew that I was in danger. I pulled out my hunting knife and held it in front of me. The creature started to move closer, and I braced myself for what was to come. But then, something strange happened. The creature disappeared into thin air, leaving me alone in the woods. I never went back to the Allegheny National Forest after that. But I couldn't forget about the strange things that I'd seen and experienced. I knew that there was something out there, something that we couldn't explain or understand. I'm an avid hiker, and I love exploring new trails. One summer, my friend and I decided to camp at a spot just outside of the Allegheny National Forest. It was quiet, secluded, and offered some amazing views of the surrounding forest. We were excited to spend a few days in the wilderness, enjoying the fresh air and natural beauty. The first day of our trip was uneventful, but we didn't sleep well because of the humidity. We woke up early the next morning, eager to start our day. We decided to hike a trail that we had never been on before. It was a bit of a drive from our campsite, but we were up for an adventure. As we drove towards the trailhead, we noticed that the forest was particularly quiet. We didn't see any other cars on the road, and there weren't many people around. When we got to the trailhead, we were surprised to see that there was only one car parked in the lot. We shrugged it off and started on our hike. The trail was beautiful. The trees towered above us, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves. We didn't encounter anyone else on the trail, and it felt like we were the only ones in the forest. We stopped to take pictures and admire the scenery, enjoying the peace and quiet. About halfway through the hike, we noticed that everything suddenly stopped. The birds and bugs went quiet, and there was an eerie stillness in the air. We both felt like something was watching us, but we couldn't see anything. It was like the forest was alive and closing in around us. We started to feel uneasy and decided to turn back. As we were hiking back towards the car, we heard a strange sound. It was like nothing we had ever heard before. A mix of metal scraping against metal and a high-pitched shriek. We both turned to look and saw something that defied explanation. It was a dark, writhing mass that seemed to move in flashes and pulses. We only saw it for a split second before we both blacked out. When we woke up, we were back in the car, and hours had passed. We don't remember anything that happened during that time. The other car was still in the parking lot, but there was no sign of the person who had parked it. We were both disoriented and scared, unsure of what had happened to us. We haven't been back to that area since. The experience left us both shaken, and we still don't know what we saw that day. It's a mystery that we may never solve, but it's something that we will never forget. The memory of that strange, silent forest still haunts us, and we wonder if we will ever be able to hike in peace again. I've had a few other strange experiences that I can't explain. Things that have made me believe in the supernatural. One time, when I was a teenager, I was home alone and heard a knocking at the door. I went to answer it and found no one there. I thought it was strange but didn't pay too much attention to it. Then, I heard the knocking again, but this time it was coming from inside the house. I searched the entire house but found no one. I was so scared that I called my parents to come home. Another time, I was staying in a hotel room and woke up in the middle of the night to find that the curtains were moving on their own, despite there being no breeze in the room. I also heard strange noises, like footsteps and whispers, but there was no one else in the room with me. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but I was so scared that I ended up leaving the hotel and finding another place to stay. I've also had strange dreams that felt very real. In one dream, I saw a ghostly figure standing at the foot of my bed. It didn't say anything, but I could feel its presence. When I woke up, I was paralyzed with fear and couldn't move for several minutes. These experiences have made me believe that there is more to this world than what we can see and understand. I try to keep an open mind and not dismiss things that I can't explain, because who knows what else is out there that we don't yet understand. Interestingly, my parents have also had a slew of strange encounters in the deep woods, adding to my belief that there are unexplainable phenomena in this world. One time, they were hiking in a remote area of the Appalachian Mountains and suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from nowhere. They couldn't find the source of the scream and were so scared that they turned back and went home. They still don't know what made that noise. Another time, my parents were camping in the same area and woke up in the middle of the night to find that their campsite was surrounded by glowing orbs. They watched in amazement as the orbs danced around them, but couldn't explain what they were or where they came from. My dad has also reported seeing strange creatures in the woods, like something out of a horror movie. He once saw a creature that he described as being like a cross between a bat and a monkey, with huge wings and long, spindly fingers. Another time, he saw what he described as a werewolf-like creature, with shaggy hair and glowing eyes. All of these experiences have left my parents with a deep sense of respect and awe for the natural world. They believe that there are forces and beings out there that we don't fully understand, and that we should approach nature with caution and reverence. As for me, I've inherited their sense of wonder and respect for the unknown. I still love hiking and exploring the deep woods, but I always keep an eye out for the unexpected. You never know what you might find out there. I remember the time my family took me camping in the Allegheny National Forest. We went on a four-wheeling adventure, and I recall being filled with excitement and wonder as we journeyed through the forest. The sights and sounds of nature surrounded us, and I felt like we were in a completely different world. We drove for what felt like miles, and I was amazed by the sheer beauty of the forest. I felt so small in comparison to the towering trees and vast expanse of greenery surrounding us. Then suddenly, we came upon a strange little shed. It stood in the middle of nowhere, and there were no other buildings in sight. I felt instantly curious and a little bit unnerved by the sight of it. The shed was old and weathered, with a chain wrapped all the way around it and secured with several padlocks, in addition to what looked like a deadbolt on the door. I couldn't understand why anyone would put so much effort into securing something so insignificant. It felt like a mystery waiting to be solved. As we continued down the trail, we reached a clearing with tall grass. I put my hands out to feel the grass tickle my palms, but then a spider fell onto my leg and got stuck in my pant leg. I freaked out and tried to brush it off, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. On a hill to our right stood a wooden post with something hanging from it. At first I thought it was an animal head, but as we got closer, I could see that it was a human head. The face was grotesque and covered in gore, and the long black hair was tangled in the tall grass around it. I felt like I couldn't move, like I was frozen in fear. My father insisted that it was just a Halloween mask and that someone was playing a prank, but something about the situation felt off. We never went back to that spot again, and the memory of the creepy shed and the head on the hill stayed with me for years. Even now I can still remember the details vividly, and I wonder if there was more to that story than my father let on. I remember the day clearly. It was a warm summer evening in the Allegheny National Forest, and I was camping with a group of friends. We had set up our tents in a remote area, far away from any other campers. The forest was thick and full of trees, but we had managed to find a clearing that was perfect for setting up camp. We spent the day hiking, fishing, and exploring the woods. As the sun began to set, we returned to camp and started a fire. We cooked hot dogs and s'mores and sat around the fire, telling stories and enjoying the peace and quiet of the forest. It was then that we heard the noise. It was a strange, low, growling sound, like nothing we had ever heard before. At first we thought it was just an animal, but the noise continued, growing louder and more persistent. We looked around, trying to see where the noise was coming from, and then we saw something moving in the shadows. At first, it was just a flicker of movement, too fast and too far away to make out any details. But then, we saw it again, and this time, it was clearer. It was two large, upright figures, walking through the trees. They were far away, but we could tell that they were much bigger than any human we had ever seen. They moved quickly, as if they were on a mission, and they disappeared into the woods. We were all stunned and couldn't believe what we had just seen. We sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, one of my friends spoke up. "Did you guys see that?" he asked. We all nodded, still in shock. "What do you think it was?" another friend asked. We tried to come up with rational explanations, but nothing seemed to fit. It couldn't have been a bear or any other animal we knew of, and it definitely wasn't a person. We stayed up late that night, talking about what we had seen and wondering if anyone else had ever experienced something similar in the area. We talked about Bigfoot and other mysterious creatures that were said to live in the forest, and we wondered if what we had seen could have been one of them. The next day, we packed up our camp and hiked out of the forest. We talked about what we had seen the whole way back, trying to make sense of it. When we got back to civilization, we looked up information about the forest and the legends and stories that surrounded it. To this day, we still talk about that night and wonder what we saw. It's a memory that we will never forget, and it has made us all believers in the mysterious and unexplainable. Months went by, and my friends and I couldn't shake off the memory of what we had seen in the Allegheny National Forest that night. We talked about it often, and did research on what creatures could possibly inhabit the forest. One day, we decided to go back to the same spot where we had seen the figures. We were determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, and perhaps find some clues. We packed our camping gear and headed back into the forest. The hike was long and tiring, but we were all excited to get to the clearing and set up camp. We arrived at the same spot and started to pitch our tents. As we were setting up, we noticed that the forest was unusually quiet. There were no birds chirping or any other sounds of wildlife. That night, we sat around the campfire, trying to recreate the same atmosphere as the previous time we were there. We told stories and talked about what we had seen, hoping to trigger any memory or feeling that could lead us to an explanation. Suddenly, we heard the same growling noise that we had heard before. It was distant at first, but then it grew louder and closer. We all froze, unsure of what to do. Then we saw the figures again. They were walking through the trees, heading in the same direction as before. We couldn't believe it. We had actually seen them again. This time we were closer, and we could make out more details. They were definitely not human, but they also didn't look like any animal we had ever seen. We decided to follow them, hoping to get a closer look. We walked for what felt like hours, but the figures seemed to be getting farther away. Eventually, we lost sight of them altogether. We were exhausted and disappointed. We had come all this way, but we still didn't have any answers. As we walked back to camp, we noticed that the forest was still silent, as if something had scared off all the animals. The next day, we decided to hike around the area where we had seen the figures. We searched for any clues or evidence that could help us understand what we had seen. We found some large footprints, but we couldn't tell if they were made by the same creatures we had seen. We left the forest that day, feeling more confused than ever. We still didn't have any answers, but we knew that we had to keep searching. The mystery of the Allegheny National Forest had become an obsession for us, and we were determined to find out what was really out there. Hey everyone, I need some help figuring out what I encountered during a recent hike in the Allegheny National Forest. Apologies for the lengthy post. About a few weeks ago, I decided to take advantage of the beautiful spring weather and explore one of the lesser-known trails. As I hiked, I enjoyed the sounds of nature, like the rustling leaves and the songs of the birds. However, as I ventured further off the beaten path, the forest suddenly went quiet. There were no more birds singing or squirrels scampering about. I knew that silence in the woods was not a good sign, so I cautiously scanned my surroundings. That's when I felt it, the sensation of being watched. Goosebumps covered my entire body. That's when I spotted it, about 50 yards away on a nearby hill. The creature had a humanoid shape, but its skin was a pale gray color. It had long arms with claw-like hands and stood at least 8 feet tall. We locked eyes, and I was paralyzed with fear. After a few heart-stopping moments, I slowly reached for my pistol. I never hike alone without it, and fired a shot into the air without breaking eye contact. The creature retreated at an incredible speed, unlike anything I'd ever seen. I stayed put for about 30 minutes, listening and watching, until the forest noises gradually returned. Though a part of me wanted to investigate the creature's tracks, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I left the forest and haven't been back since. Even driving near the area gives me an eerie feeling, as if the creature knows I'm there and is watching me. Can anyone help me identify what I might have encountered? Any insight would be greatly appreciated. I've tried doing some research on my own, looking for any similar sightings or legends from the Allegheny National Forest area. I came across a few local tales and folklore, but nothing quite matched the creature I encountered. I've spoken with other hikers and even park rangers, but they've never heard of anything like it either. I've been considering going back to the forest with a group of experienced hikers, maybe even an expert in local wildlife or cryptozoology. But deep down, I'm not sure if I'm ready to face the creature again, especially knowing that it might be watching me. The incident has left me feeling uneasy, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling that there's something out there in the forest that we don't fully understand. I continue to share my story with others in the hopes that someone might have answers, but so far, nothing concrete has come to light. If you or anyone you know have experienced something similar in or around the Allegheny National Forest, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd appreciate any information that could help explain this mysterious encounter. Until then, I'll keep searching for answers and try to come to terms with what I saw that day. I was hiking in the Allegheny National Forest, enjoying the peace and tranquility of nature. I'd heard stories of strange occurrences in the forest, but I never believed them. I was confident that I could handle anything that came my way. That was until I heard a strange noise that made me feel uneasy. It sounded like something was following me, but every time I turned around, I saw nothing. The noise persisted, and it was getting louder with every step I took. Fear started to set in, and I began to wonder if the stories were true after all. I turned around once more and saw a flash of red hair. It disappeared as soon as it came into view, and I was left feeling bewildered. My heart was pounding, and my senses were heightened. I felt like I was being watched, and I kept catching glimpses of something moving in the trees. The noise continued to follow me, and it was getting closer. I was scared out of my mind and didn't know what to do. I saw the figure again, and this time, it was closer. It was tall and had red hair. I could feel my heart racing as it began to walk towards me. I didn't know what to do, so I started to run. I didn't stop until I was out of breath and far away from the figure. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. The noise persisted, and it felt like it was getting louder. I heard it again and turned around, and this time I saw the figure up close. It was a lycanthrope, a werewolf. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and its face was that of a wolf. I was paralyzed with fear, and I didn't know what to do. I started to run again, and this time I didn't stop until I reached my car. I got in and drove away as fast as I could. My mind was racing, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I did some research and found out more about lycanthropes. I learned that they were werewolves and that they were often associated with the forest. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I couldn't just ignore what had happened. I decided to talk to some people who knew more about lycanthropes. I found a group of people who were interested in the paranormal. They agreed to go to the forest with me and try to find out what was going on. We made a plan, and we set out to the forest at night. We brought cameras and recording devices, hoping to capture any evidence of the lycanthropes. We walked around the forest for hours, but we didn't see anything. We heard strange noises and saw shadows, but we couldn't find any lycanthropes. We were disappointed, but we didn't give up. We decided to go back to the forest the next night. We walked around for hours again, but we still didn't find anything. We were getting frustrated and tired, but we didn't want to give up. We decided to split up and cover more ground. I went off on my own. I walked for a while and then heard a noise. I turned around and saw a lycanthrope. It was standing right in front of me, and I froze. I didn't know what to do. but I was too scared to move. The lycanthrope didn't attack me, but it just stood there and stared at me. It was like it was studying me. After a few minutes, the lycanthrope turned and walked away. I followed it, not knowing what to expect. It led me to a clearing in the forest. In the clearing, there were several lycanthropes. They were all staring at me, and I felt like I was in a trance. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there and waited. One of the lycanthropes approached me. It spoke to me in a language I didn't understand. At first I was frightened, but then I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew that I wasn't in any danger. The lycanthrope took me by the hand and led me to a group of people who were sitting around a campfire. They were all lycanthropes, and they welcomed me warmly. They told me that they had been watching me, and that they had been waiting for the right time to reveal themselves. They explained that they were the guardians of the forest, and that they had been protecting it for generations. They said that they didn't usually reveal themselves to humans, but they felt that I was different. They said that I had a special connection to the forest, and that they wanted to show me their world. Over the next few days, I lived among the lycanthropes. They showed me their ways of life and their rituals. They taught me how to hunt and gather food, and how to communicate with the animals in the forest. I learned that the lycanthropes were not the monsters that they were made out to be. They were a peaceful and wise people who had a deep connection to the earth and its creatures. They showed me the beauty of the forest and the importance of preserving it for future generations. When it was time for me to leave, the lycanthropes gave me a gift. It was a necklace made of wolf teeth. They told me that it would protect me on my journey and that it would remind me of the time that I spent with them. As I left the forest, I felt a sense of sadness. I didn't want to leave the lycanthropes and their world behind, but I knew that I had to go back to my own life. I promised myself that I would never forget the time that I spent with them, and that I would always cherish the memories.